Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got a great show for you today. I am back in the chair, and so is my friend Lindsay Granger. You were in South Carolina. I was in Palm Springs. We've been all over the country, I guess.
I know. We're like doing a world tour. Maybe we should start campaigning together next.
Oh, campaigning for what or for who?
We have to talk a lot about that. Yes. But before we get there, let's talk about what's on your radar.
Well, what is America First, and who gets to define what that even means? According to Donald Trump, it's him. America First is, after all, a slogan closely identified with the president, probably second only to Make America Great Again. And to his credit, Trump has drawn considerable support for following through on promises to center American foreign policy on the needs of, well, America. When he first emerged on the political scene, Trump broke with years of bipartisan foreign policy consensus, particularly on the right. He was one of the only prominent political figures identified with the Republican Party who was willing to confidently and correctly assert that the war in Iraq was a grave mistake. And it's a theme he's largely stuck with. During his recent trip to the Middle East, Trump slammed neoconservatives and nation builders who wrongly think that American military might is the key to world peace. Why am I bringing this up now? Well, the neoconservative nation-building ethos is again trying to exercise control over U.S. foreign policy and over Trump himself. Indeed, the neocons are trying to redefine America First and trick Trump into thinking that their foreign policy, not his foreign policy, is what Americans want. I hope Trump doesn't listen. This is all happening amidst the backdrop of a war between Israel and Iran. Over the weekend, Israel bombed Iranian nuclear facilities and assassinated top Iranian generals. In response, Iran is retaliating. Now, the fight between Israel and Iran is a fight between an allied democracy and an Islamic theocracy. It's obvious who we are rooting for, Israel. But that doesn't mean the U.S. needs to join this fight. On the contrary, we should stay out of it entirely. Let me be extremely clear. Israel is free to pursue its own military objectives in defense of its people. But Israel does not and should not rely on U.S. military support and cover for its wars of choice against foes in the Middle East. They chose this, and that's fine. They have the right to choose it. We do not have the obligation to get dragged into the conflict. The U.S. has other, more pressing problems than sorting out the Middle East. I can't put it any better than conservative commentator Matt Walsh, who writes on X, Iran does not pose any credible threat to the United States. We do not need to get involved in yet another war in the Middle East for reasons that have nothing to do with defending our own nation. Unfortunately, Israel's government wants U.S. involvement, and so they're pretending that the U.S. was in on this attack from the beginning. In fact, the Israeli government has been so bold as to suggest that Trump's negotiations with Iran were kind of deliberate distraction that made this attack possible. That is a lie. Trump was negotiating with the Iranians because he knows negotiations are the only reasonable course of action. We don't want Iran to develop nuclear missiles, and so we are engaged in diplomacy that aims to thwart them from doing so. Israel should be all for this. But it seems that Israel was not on board with diplomacy, and Trump was not on board with this most recent attack. According to reporting in the Wall Street Journal, Netanyahu said to Trump on Monday that he would authorize the attack. Trump told him to hold off, insisting that the diplomatic approach to dismantling Iran's nuclear work should play out before turning to a military step. The headline of that report is, quote, Trump, a self-styled peacemaker, gets drawn into foreign entanglements. And that's exactly what's happening. A foreign power is trying to make their war our war. This is something that many America First conservatives are warning Trump against. As I said, Matt Walsh condemned it. Tucker Carlson has condemned it. So have countless others. In response, Trump pushed back. A correspondent for The Atlantic magazine called Trump over the weekend and asked him about Tucker Carlson's criticism specifically of Israel. In response, Trump said this, well, considering that I'm the one that developed America First and considering that the term wasn't used until I came along, I think I'm the one that decides that for those people who say they want peace, you can't have peace if Iran has a nuclear weapon. So for all of those wonderful people who don't want to do anything about Iran having a nuclear weapon, that's not peace. One aside, isn't it remarkable that Trump makes himself totally available to members of the mainstream media, even hostile ones? I wonder if Biden ever took any random calls from Atlantic reporters during his presidency. Yeah, didn't think so. Anyway, as to the substance of what Trump said, look, it's true, we don't want Iran to get a nuclear weapon. It's true that Trump is MAGA and the base listens to him and trusts him. But I suspect Trump knows, and his foreign policy team knows, that another unpopular war in the Middle East would be a catastrophic mistake. It would doom the rest of the agenda. It could take down Trump's entire presidency. as it doomed the presidency of the last Republican president, George W. Bush, who foolishly bet everything on the idea that Iraq would welcome us as liberators. Remember that? Some conservatives are currently doing a version of that, naively expecting the Iranian people to overthrow their despotic regime. I hope they do so. It's an inspiring dream, but it's just a dream. We have to be clear-eyed and wide awake about what's happening. America first means just that, America first. No more foreign entanglements.
I actually want to commend that balanced perspective. And I actually want to commend any conservative commentators that came to the table to say that we should de-escalate. This isn't about missiles and it isn't about a war per se. It's about people. There are civilians that have already died in both countries, and there are civilians in the United States, Iranian civilians, and Israeli civilians that don't want a war. And so when Trump said that he ran on and coined the term putting America first, I think the base of people that voted for him that want us to take care of our country's interests are also not satisfied with this being a solution. And I think when you go on TV most recently this weekend and say, sometimes you have to fight it out, well, fight it out doesn't just stop at the fight. We understand that Iran has close relationships, both military and economically, with China and Russia. And we understand what the implications are if the U.S. gets involved. And yes, we do support Israel as far as providing them with weapons and making sure that nobody gets past their Iron Dome. But when Israel is the instigator here, the United States has an option. We can either be the match or we can be the extinguisher. And I think our role diplomatically across the world, even with our allies, is to first try to be the extinguisher when there are fires around the world. And I think that we have to make sure that stance is clear and also tell Israel that even though they are an ally, we are not just going to willy-nilly sit by while they do anything. It's also important to note that it would take a year, even with the uranium that Iran has, to develop a nuclear weapon in full. So it's not like something would happen overnight that we wouldn't understand or know about, and provide ample time to make a decision that we needed to be involved in this escalation. But we're not there yet.
That's a key point. The hawks and their allies in the mainstream media have been saying, Iran, days away from a nuclear weapon. For years. We've heard that specific phrase, days away, over and over and over again. And look, in an ideal world, if I could snap my fingers and make it so they couldn't have a nuclear weapon, I would do that. If I could snap my fingers and have their despotic, religious, totalitarian regime replaced by a secular democracy or a kind of government that existed before the Islamic extremists took over, I would absolutely do that. I'm not saying like, oh, they're lovely, wonderful government. No, it's a despotism. But they are not a threat to the U.S. It's dubious whether they're even a threat to Israel, that we can shoot their missiles out of the sky. Ron Paul, hero of mine, used to point this out when asked about Iran. In the Cold War era, the Soviet Union, our enemies, had countless nuclear weapons. And they didn't attack us. We dealt with that. We still negotiated with them. We still did diplomacy with them. This is a tiny little nation with far less weaponry at its disposal than the Soviet Union, and we're not going to talk to them? We're going to be in fear of them? That makes no sense.
And the timing to me is the biggest thing. This happened on Thursday, the initial attack that Israel launched, but we were set to talk to them yesterday, Sunday, so they didn't even allow, even though this was the sixth round, negotiations take a while sometimes, they didn't even allow the diplomatic process to play out, which is really important. And Iran's now talking about exiting the non-proliferation treaty, NPT, which means that they are not longer agreeing to not build out nuclear warheads and being involved in oversight by the United Nations, which is a problem.
It is a problem.
So I think, we want to de-escalate, but we're going to talk about this much more.
Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have a just splendid show for you today, of course.
As always.
It is Tuesday morning, yes, and I'm excited about it, aren't you?
Me too. I'm always excited to be here with you in D.C. from Denver. So tell me, what's on your radar?
Okay, let's do it. Well, when it comes to the conflict between Israel and Iran, the U.S. government and President Donald Trump, most of all, needs to listen to America First conservatives who know that the people of the U.S. do not want our country involved in another regime change war. In fact, I can't say it any better than Tucker Carlson, who was on Steve Bannon's podcast yesterday to urge Trump to let cooler heads prevail. Importantly, Tucker emphasized that this is not about being anti-Israel. It's not anti-Israel at all to want to engage in diplomacy with Iran rather than warfare. Watch this.
If you think I'm anti-Israel, man, you have lost the plot, son. If you think I'm your enemy, not at all. I like Israel. Are you kidding? I've spent a lot of time there. I continue to like it. I pray that Jerusalem is not damaged. I feel so sad for the Israelis who've been killed in the last couple of days and the Iranians who've been killed in the last couple of days, with nothing to do with any of this.
Tucker continues.
But the point is, if you think that saying, hey, let's focus on my country where I was born, where my family's been for hundreds of years, that was the promise of the last election, please do it. If you think that's hate, you know, you've really lost perspective, I guess is what I would.
Tucker went on to say that while he loves Trump, he is really worried that if Israel drags the U.S. into its war, Trump's entire agenda could be derailed. I actually really love Trump, says Tucker. I think he's a deeply humane, kind person, but I'm really afraid my country is going to be further weakened by this. I think we're going to see the end of the American empire, end quote. Tucker then criticized the neocons and nation builders in the Republican Party who are pushing the U.S. toward war. He called them out by name, Mark Levin, Sean Hannity, and others who do not have the best interests of the MAGA movement and the Trump agenda, let alone the nation, in mind. Meanwhile, Iranian officials are signaling behind closed doors that they are open to more dialogue with the U.S. about nuclear proliferation if the U.S. does not join Israel's war effort. Now, that's according to reporting in the Wall Street Journal and elsewhere. An Arab official told the Journal that the Iranians know the U.S. is supporting Israel in its defense, and they are sure the U.S. is supporting Israel logistically, but they want guarantees the U.S. won't attack or won't join the attacks. That's all we have to do. Stay out of the conflict involving two other foreign nations and engage in diplomacy. Seems like a no-brainer. Yet too many people are succumbing to magical thinking about regime change. They believe that if the U.S. helps Israel launch further attacks on Iran, the regime will crumble. Netanyahu has even suggested that Israel might target the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. Trump has reportedly nixed that idea so far, thank goodness. Look, how many times must we learn this lesson? Overthrowing and killing the bad guys in the Middle East, that's the easy part. Replacing them with people who aren't even worse is hard. We learned this in Iraq. We learned it in Libya. Afghanistan was a disaster. Syria is so far so good, although the new leadership was formerly allied with ISIS and has indeed murdered dissidents all over the country. Keep in mind that the U.S. did not get overly involved in the Syrian revolution either, except by providing economic pressure in the form of sanctions. If anyone thinks that the U.S.-backed assassination of the Iranian supreme leader was going to lead to the creation of a pro-Western, secular, liberal democracy, I would ask you to have your head examined. Unfortunately, that ridiculous notion is believed by the bipartisan foreign policy establishment, the so-called experts in both parties, the people who brought you the Iraq war disaster. They are putting tremendous pressure on Trump to fall in line, do what they say, even though they've been proven wrong time and time again. Now we will see if Trump holds the line. There's another dimension to this, Lindsay, that is emerging. I saw Representative Thomas Massie tweeting about this. You know, we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, and I bring this point up frequently, and it's just often ignored. The President of the United States cannot unilaterally go to war with a country. It is, in fact, Congress's responsibility to declare war. So if war with Iran is such a good idea, let it be debated and discussed in Congress, and Congress can vote to declare war on Iran, and then we can join Israel in its efforts if that's what our elected representatives think is wise. I don't think that's the right course of action, but if we're going to do that, it must be done properly, according to our Constitution. The president, not just Trump, any president cannot unilaterally take us to war without congressional oversight and approval. It just is not the case. It has to be that way. So I hope, as we're inching closer to conflict, and Trump seems more and more willing to go along and get involved, I hope the role of Congress is not forgotten. I saw Thomas Massie making that point, and AOC, one of the most far-right and far-left people, agreeing that Congress must assert itself here.
We don't need another war. There are very obvious diplomatic off-ramps right now on the table. But continuing the strikes is going to kind of slam that option because Iran has a firm stance that if you keep bombing us and we keep being in the middle of what is looking like a war, we're not going to continue to negotiate. But they have voiced, even as recent as yesterday, that they would like to continue speaking, just like they wanted to continue speaking 2 days ago on Sunday before they were attacked on Thursday. That was the plan. And sometimes these talks take longer than we'd like. Now, I hear a lot of people on the right who are in favor of going to war with Iran, saying that, this is the time to strike. Iran is the weakest it's ever been. And there's a whole conversation about that perspective. But I don't think it's in our best interest. When we look at what Israel has done so far, they didn't even attack or affect the nuclear facilities, which is the main goal that they're going after. So killing the supreme leader, assassination will only start a new war. It's certainly not going to end one. I think it's going to fire up, and not that they have the manpower to beat the U.S., but it's like, why would we want to engage with a country that's allied with China and Russia when we obviously are talking about the same thing in Russia right now, not wanting to engage with them in that way? So why would we engage with one of their allies this way? I think there's better diplomatic ways to solve this. I also know that 224 people in Iran have already been killed. 24 Israelis have already been killed, and 600 have already been injured. So the number has probably skyrocketed by the time that you're or anyone at home is watching this. It's past that. And so I just want to know what is on the line. If civilians don't want this, then why are people doing this? I also think, Trump has to be careful about the mixed messaging, because when diplomacy is put out there by another country, there's Oman, Qatar, they're all asking for, a peaceful resolution to figure out how to continue to have talks. And Trump is saying, yeah, that's a good idea, and saying some of that. But then he's at G7 yesterday, and he's refusing to sign a de-escalation agreement that the rest of the countries there were asking him to sign. And so that would be a very obvious stance to say, of course, Israel's our ally. Of course, we support Israel, but we don't think this is a good idea. And like Trump is the poster child for being allowed to disagree with other leaders, even within his own party. He does that very publicly. So I don't know why we're tiptoeing around something that he even campaigned on not being a good idea.
I agree fully. I think that people are, again, duping themselves into a kind of, they'll greet us as liberators mindset. The regime is ready to fall. That might be the case, that the regime is ready to fall. I can't tell. But who knows that it's going to be replaced by something that's better. That has been our experience in the Middle East, is replacing bad regimes with worse regimes. Now, maybe you can say you can't do worse than what they have. I guess that could be possible, but these authoritarians, these extremists, have proven to be more stable in this part of the world than we would like or expect, and I just don't know how many more times we need to learn this lesson. It seems like the same people who got Iraq so wrong are painting the exact same portrait of the situation in Iran, and with no acknowledgement that they were catastrophically wrong the last time. And I don't trust them. I don't know what credibility they have to assert that it is a good idea to start, indiscriminately bombing Iran, hoping to topple the regime, and that somehow we're going to come out ahead in all this. I just don't find that very plausible, and I think diplomacy is an avenue we have not yet exhausted and should resume.
We're going to be talking about this a lot more.
Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got just another great show for you today. I am joined by Chris Cillizza for the first time I've been hosting with
I know. This is my second time ever, but first time with you.
So it's fun.
I know. We're excited. I'm thrilled to do this.
It's really the joy of Rising that I get to meet so many interesting new people.
I thank you for calling me interesting and new. Very few people call me that. I'll take both. How are you?
I am doing just fine. Fine. Ready to get to the news.
Yeah, it's a little weird. It feels later than Wednesday.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't know why, because it's summer. My kids are out of school, which is actually more of a problem, interestingly enough.
You're like,
we have to entertain
send them back to school.
You have to entertain them. They're like, well, what are we doing now? And I'm like, well, I'm not going to the golf course again. Like, they just want to be entertained full time. Don't have kids, but kids are...
Maybe someday.
It's an adventure. All right, Robby, what's on your radar? Let's do it.
Let's get to it. War with Iran is unfortunately brewing, as President Donald Trump has now given every public indication that he is willing to follow Israel's lead and embroil the U.S. in another Middle East conflict. Critics of that notion on both the right and the left contend that a war of choice against Iran is a violation of the America First ethos and would break a fundamental campaign promise. Trump told voters no new wars when he ran for president again. Many people in the MAGA coalition are expecting him to stick to that. But if there's going to be a war with Iran, it is essential that the matter be discussed, debated, and voted on by our Congress. Iran is a sovereign nation with its own government, which means only Congress has the power to declare war on it. Look, this isn't some terrorist group already dubiously covered under the decades-old use of fourth authorization for the global war on terror. War with Iran would require new, unique authorization. And this would be an offensive war because Iran has not attacked the U.S. Not directly. Again, that's something only Congress can approve. Our founders gave Congress, not the president, Congress, sole authority to declare war. It is the president's job to carry out a war, to conduct its military operation once Congress has signed off. That's how it worked in World War II, for instance. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt asked Congress to vote to declare war, and all of them did so. If war with Iran is such a great idea, well, then members of Congress should be eager to vote for it. Let them be on the record supporting it, not with tweets, but with votes. Make them actually do something instead of just talking, prattling endlessly on social media and TV. The need for Congress to act is not lost, thankfully, on Republican Representative Thomas Massie. He was put forth, along with Democratic Representative Ro Khanna, a War Powers Resolution Act that affirmatively states the U.S. government is not authorized to conduct a war against Iran. Now, I am happy to see that many left-leaning Democratic representatives, including AOC, have endorsed this motion, which just basically reaffirms what's already written in the Constitution. The president cannot go to war without Congress. Bipartisanship, by the way, so often applauded by the mainstream media when bipartisanship is accomplishing something bad. Mainstream elites love to applaud squishy rhino Republicans for joining with liberal Democrats to raise spending or increase regulation or save a government program. That's the kind of bipartisanship the media loves. What they don't like so much is the bipartisanship that sometimes happens at the outer edges of the left and the right, when figures like Thomas Massie and AOC come together and say, wait a minute, let's not rush headfirst into another war without thinking this through and checking in with whether the citizens of America want that. Yet I expect most people much prefer this kind of bipartisanship. I certainly do. As for Trump joining Israel and attacking Iran, I would like to remind our president that 10 years ago, when he first appeared on the political scene, he became super popular, not with the elites, but with the rank and file Republicans, because he dared to say that party leadership, that the Republican president, George W. Bush, they were all wrong about Iraq. Here's a refresher, one of the debates in the 2016 election cycle.
The war in Iraq was a big, fat mistake, all right? Obviously, it was a mistake. So George Bush made a mistake. We can make mistakes, but that one was a beauty. We should have never been in Iraq. We have destabilized the Middle East. They lied. Okay. They said there were weapons of mass destruction. There were none, and they knew there were none. There were no weapons of mass destruction.
Now, you can say Iran and Iraq are different countries, and the circumstances are different, and that is true. If Iran hawks want to make their case, look, they have the floor. But you have to convince the American people. And regardless, Congress has to do its job, even if they don't want to, which seems to always be the case these days. So it's very simple. We should debate this in the halls of Congress like our founders intended and let them vote.
I was nodding the whole time.
I saw you.
They have my nodding camera, me off camera. Yes, no, totally. Look, I'm old, so I'm 49. I remember this debate happens. Every president, bipartisan, doesn't want to go to Congress to get an authorization of use of military force. I mean, it is, I feel like Tim Kaine, ever since he's been in the Senate, has been like banging the drum of like, why are we not doing this? And every time they're like, well, it's not exactly a military, we're just going in for a little while.
Right.
You know, like, it's ridiculous. And, you know, I would add, Robby, like, this is, whether you like Donald Trump or you don't like Donald Trump, the reality of Donald Trump's first, 5.5 months as president is rapid and radical expansion of executive power.
Yes.
This is another case of that. And Congress, Republicans in Congress, in leadership, being like, okay, so I guess we're getting rid of USAID. Oh, okay, well, I guess we're getting rid of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Oh, so the Department of Education gone. Again, in the Constitution.
All of those things I support, but Congress needs to act.
This is my point.
I agree with you.
Look, when you have a Republican majority in the House and Senate and you have a Republican president, Republicans should do conservative things. Yeah. That's why we have two parties in this country. But when you abrogate the processes that are in place, you set a tremendously dangerous precedent. I mean, I don't know how you don't draw that conclusion.
I don't know what you do with a government. We talk about the crisis of democracy. What do you do in the situation where Congress, where your chief lawmaking body, has simply no interest, for the most part, in doing their job? It's not like they're all out there protesting the loss of their authority and power. They seem, for the most part, happy to have it taken from them so they can spend more time being pundits on television and on social media.
Raising money, raising their.
That's all they want to do.
And it's yes.
Endless committee hearings.
The incentive structure is all screwed up. But again, I always cite, and I'll cite one on both sides. Like if you had to name 5 of the most that not people like us, but normal people would know. Name 5 members of Congress the average person would know. I'm not sure they get to 5, but I guarantee you, in the first 5 are Marjorie Taylor Greene and Ilhan Omar. And a lot of people would probably say Matt Gaetz too, even though he's not in Congress anymore. Well, none of those people do anything in Congress. They just bang the drum and, you know what I mean, raise money, go on TV. And that's part of the problem. But what's amazing to me is that they're not even trying. That's the thing. It's like, you are ceding, it is a co-equal branch of government. It's right there in the Constitution. I remember, again, I'm old enough to remember the old, after 94, the pocket constitutions that everyone was carrying.
Oh, my people.
That's right in your wheelhouse.
My people. And even with Iraq, there was a vote taken. There was a debate had.
And it mattered. I wrote this down, right? So go back.
It mattered for Hillary Clinton.
I was going to say, if Hillary Clinton does not vote for the war in Iraq, she almost certainly beats Barack Obama.
For sure.
The only logical explanation for Obama's candidacy, right, because he had just been elected, I was right in the beginning. I saw that video of him saying, I oppose the war. He's at a rally in Chicago or something. They played that. That was his sort of lever to get in the race. If she doesn't vote for it, it doesn't happen.
I was a student. I was at an undergraduate at the University of Michigan at the time. And he was beloved for that reason. A lot of other reasons too, but that was the main reason.
But that was the spark. And I think people don't remember that. That was the spark that got this all started.
No wonder they don't want to be on the record.
Exactly.
Voting one way or the other.
They don't want to be on the record.
Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got another splendid show for you today. I am joined by Niall Stanich. Niall, it's been a while.
It has been a while. I'm glad we are reunited, Robby, for one day's entertainment. Should be good.
So am I. What a treat.
How have you been?
I have been quite well, actually. How have you been?
I have been likewise very well, but I want to hear more about what is on your radar, so take it away.
Yes, lots of subjects to get to today that you and I enjoy discussing, I think, Iran being a very big one. Now, one of the criticisms of alternative media I have heard over the years is that podcasters, social media personalities, and influencers who describe themselves as independent-minded often fail to ask tough questions of their guests or push back when greater scrutiny is warranted. Joe Rogan is frequently cited as an example of this. He platforms provocative guests like Daryl Cooper and Ian Carroll. And because the format is friendly and informal, he fails to press them when they make dubious or outrageous claims. That was the thrust of the criticism made by British journalist Douglas Murray, who used his own appearance on Rogan as an opportunity to attack the host's failure to properly interrogate people that Murray considers to be, conspiracy theorists. Now, by contrast, mainstream media is characterized by hostile interviews. For example, see every single instance of CNN, CBS, or ABC interviewing a Republican political figure, though, to be fair, interviews with Democrats are often contentious as well. Politicians don't really want to be asked tough questions, but journalism is supposed to be adversarial, and the public is best served by interview formats that provoke discomfort. Now, if the traditional mainstream format is entirely replaced by podcasts where people get to say whatever they want and face no pushback whatsoever, it should be obvious that, 1, this would be worse for the country, and 2, politicians would absolutely prefer it. But here's the thing. The current debate over whether the U.S. military should become more involved in Israel's war against Iran is a powerful counterexample and showcases the unique ability of the podcast universe to, in some important cases, cut through the mainstream media's reflexive deference to hawkish national security experts and get to the root of fundamental questions. Do the American people really want another regime change war in the Middle East? Now, this dynamic was well illustrated by Tucker Carlson's recent interview with Senator Ted Cruz on X. The pair of conservative giants engaged in a 2-hour exchange on the subject of Iran. It was feisty and intermittently unpleasant, for them at least. It was madly entertaining for viewers, and gave Carlson ample opportunity to expose the hollowness of Cruz's position, which seemed to be that regime change in Iran would somehow work out better than regime change in Iraq, or Libya, or Syria. We played some of that interview yesterday, and subsequently I watched the whole thing, and it's really, really good content. I can't recommend it more. Here's another exchange.
Asking you answer it. Give me another reason. If you're not an anti-Semite, give me another reason why the obsession is Israel.
I am in no sense obsessed with Israel. We are on the brink of war with Iran, and so these are valid questions.
But you're not asking about Iran or the
If I can finish, you asked me why I'm obsessed with Israel.
Yep.
3 minutes after telling me that when you first ran for Congress, you elucidated one of your main goals, which is to defend Israel.
Yes.
And I'm the one who's obsessed with Israel.
Yeah, that brief exchange really doesn't do it justice. What happened was that Cruz accused Carlson and other critics of the war effort of being obsessed with Israel, and even insinuating this was due to some vague anti-Semitic undercurrent. This accusation was remarkable because just moments earlier, as Carlson pointed out there, Cruz had admitted his own reason for running for office was to be the most pro-Israel U.S. senator in history. And then moments later, he confessed his unwavering support for Israel was due to a biblical passage that emphasizes those who side with Israel will be blessed. In response, Carlson sardonically mused on whether the Bible's authors had a specific Israeli government in mind. Look, it's not anti-Jewish or anti-Israel for the U.S. to think very carefully about whether supporting and aiding military strikes against Iran is in the best interest of Americans. Israel uses American weapons to launch its attacks, and it relies on American technology to protect its own citizens from Iranian counterattack. Israel does have the right to defend itself against attacks from hostile foreign powers and terrorists. It does not have the right to single-mindedly drag the U.S. into yet another boondoggle in the Middle East, particularly without congressional authorization. Now, Carlson, a Fox News host turned independent media giant, is actually hardly alone among podcasters in evincing skepticism about doing Israel's bidding in the Middle East. Joe Rogan is perturbed. Theo Vaughn has expressed horror over Israel's campaign in Gaza. Dave Smith says he regrets voting for Trump, even thinks Trump should be impeached for breaking his promise not to start new wars. Those are just the plausibly right-adjacent podcasters. Left-leaning ones like Cenk Uygur, Mehdi Hassan, Glenn Greenwald, they're, of course, speaking up as well. Now, consider the mainstream media. Admittedly, I have not watched every single second of commentary on CNN, MSNBC, CBS, ABC, or Fox this past week, nor have I read every column in the New York Times and the Washington Post. So if the following impression is false, I stand ready to apologize. But it certainly does not appear to me to be the case that legacy media commentary is intensely critical of what's about to take place in the Middle East. This is not particularly surprising. In the run-up to the Iraq War, mainstream media institutions were supportive on balance and frequently provided important justifications for the Bush administration. The New York Times was a particularly egregious offender. So here's my bottom line. Disdain independent media all you want. But with the U.S. government once again gearing up to do something really reckless that I believe a silent majority of Americans oppose, well, I'm glad at least this time around there is a healthy ecosystem of independent thinkers on the right and left who stand ready to argue against the mainstream bipartisan foreign policy consensus.
Good radar, Robby, as you would perhaps expect. I agree with quite a lot of that. First of all, I would share your compliments toward Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson, someone who I have been critical of in lots of ways for all the reasons you would expect in terms of his more orthodox right-wing positions. But I thought that his interrogation of Ted Cruz was really strong and really exposed some of the contradictions in Cruz's position. We don't have time to go through every single thing, but there was a very telling exchange, I thought, where Carlson was pressing Cruz about, well, is Iran really strong and therefore to be feared and we need to take action now, or really weak and that's why we can take action now? And Cruz seemed to be arguing the two things simultaneously. Yes. And that sort of interrogation, I think, is very useful. In terms of independent media, there is, I think, a broader spectrum of views available. I mean, it seems to me that on this question in particular, whether you're watching CNN or you're watching Fox, there's a fairly narrow band of opinion that can be acceptably expressed, and that band of opinion does seem to be broader in some independent channels for sure.
Yes, and it's very sort of narrow is the right word. It's a lot of, I see a lot of commentary. Maybe I've just been watching the news reports that it's about, well, here are the technical capabilities of Israel. Here are the technical capabilities of the U.S. Here's what we expect from Iran. Here's where we think the weapons are. And less big picture, but okay, what happens if we do this? And I've seen so little discussion in more mainstream places of, well, who, let's say we kill Khamenei, who becomes the next leader of Iran? Is it just someone else from the Islamic extremist faction? Probably. Someone else from the military. The idea, and it comes through in that interview, Ted Cruz says, well, the ideal thing would be the people rise up and install a democratic leadership. Sure. I mean, yes, if I could manufacture that out of the ethos. That is what I would want to happen. But what gives you confidence that is going to take place? And Ted Cruz really had no answer for that, and nor does anyone else that we hear from. So some perspective on that would be so helpful with the Iraq example, you know, in our heads from our own recent lifetimes.
Yeah, and the willingness to discuss the fundamentals of this conflict, which the US seems to be on the brink of joining. Israel has nuclear weapons. You know, do we now accept that countries like India or Pakistan can bomb the other because of a putative threat? One thing before we go, Robby, you mentioned about right-leaning podcasters. We do, I believe, have a clip of Theo Vaughn, who's been really interesting on this topic generally, not presenting himself as an expert, but talking about how he sees this. Do we have that clip, guys?
Trying to get us into a war with Iran or not, America, if Israel is trying to. I don't trust the Israel leader at all. I don't believe anything that guy says. And I don't think that our soldiers should have to go and defend stuff that they start.
Yeah, it's a very good clip. And, you know, it's important to remember, so we all credit now Trump's strategy of appearing on that podcast with Joe Rogan and others as part of his broader appeal to Gen Z, to young men, and being successful, winning that demographic for Republicans over Democrats. This is a demographic that does not want to get sent to fight in a foreign war and is going to be totally against this. And Trump should keep in mind that if he goes to war with Iran, he's going against new voters he took in specifically because they like the more non-interventionist standpoint of it.
Exactly. And Vaughn there presenting himself as not an expert but the voice of that kind of constituency, I think, is very important.